folks. Welcome to Friday. Todd and I are back with another episode of Freedom from the Press. Today, it's going to be an exciting episode. There's a lot happening, but we wanted to take a minute to talk about Social Security. And Todd, take it away.
Yeah, let's introduce. Yeah, good to see everyone again. This is number 4 now, and it's said often, but I think we mean it this time. You're going to want to stick around for the end and listen to the other thing. We are doing a deep dive into Social Security today. How did it start? What is it at right now? What are the lies you're getting told by politicians on both sides of the aisles? This is a Republican and Democrat problem. We're going to go really deep into this. I think it's going to be a good show.
Awesome. Yeah, so how this show came about is we saw a political ad. And it was talking about, Republicans are trying to take away our Social Security, and some of that came up in the debate and whatnot. And Todd and I hadn't really talked about it that deeply, and we're like, this is just a scam, and people don't know it. And our immediate reaction was, what can we do to help the world to just educate them in simple layman's terms for how Social Security works, where it's at, how bad it really is, and how our political system, both Democrats and Republicans, have ruined it. And if you remember back in Trump's first term, he was talking about, like, we need to have a conversation about Social Security, and he got lambasted for it, like they were gonna cut it off. So it was truly remarkable. So,
and it's coming back right now. You see Republican candidates talking about the entitlement programs that's not sustainable, and we're going to get into some numbers here from the CBO, nonpartisan government agency. It's saying, look, you're going to run out of money in 10 years here. So the conversation's coming back, but then what do you see happening in the media, Democrat side of the aisle? They're pushing the same lies, the same narratives, the same propaganda about, no, everything's fine. But we're going to show you that it's not today.
Yeah, maybe we should start with the the tweet that the guy sent in response to Nikki Haley, and just to kind of level set for who the audience is that should really pay attention to this episode.
Yeah, let's pull that up here.
So Nikki Haley had posted a video talking about, hey, we need to look at restructuring entitlements. And what did Jim have to respond, Todd?
So if you're listening on audio, here is Jim Godbee. Probably didn't need to say his name here, but he responds to Nikki Haley. I heard you say 65 is way too early for Social Security. I have one thing to say, up yours. We paid into that BS program our entire life. It's our money, not yours. Go pound sand. There's a lot to unpack in just this tweet right here. Let's highlight the sentence where he says, we paid into the program our entire life, and it's our money. I think that's the biggest flaw out there, Jason. I don't know about you, but the common perception of Social Security is that what I get taken out of my paycheck every week is the money that gets paid back to me when I start drawing on that Social Security, and that's not at all the case.
100% untrue. And so to level set where Social Security is today, just to look at how bloated it is. And we'll go back through the historical stuff and how we got here. But in 2023, last fiscal year reported, we had collected in Social Security tax $1.05 trillion. So that's the current tax that we've collected. We paid out $1.097 trillion. So we lost $40 billion, billion with a B, folks, out of the savings. The total Social Security savings is $2.7 trillion. Now, $2.7 trillion, heck of a lot of money. But when you're spending $1.1 trillion a year, and that number's going up as more people are added, or they're talking about increasing benefits, all those sorts of things, some automatic things kick in with inflation right now. So if you think just on flatline, if we didn't collect Social Security income tax for the next 2 years, Social Security would be gone. And Todd's got the chart pulled up. So this is right from the Social Security website too. This isn't like we made something up or we tried to figure something out. And you can see the numbers. So the first column there is how much we collected. The second column is how much we paid out. The third one is the deficit. And then if you look on the far right, that's the savings account. And so if you think about that, us folks who are paying into Social Security right now, today, if no more taxes, no more money was put in the pool, it would be gone in just over 2 years. Now, that's not the reality. We're still collecting taxes, but if you look at the tax going in versus the payment going out, you see this gap widening, and great job on the graphic. So the top one is how much we're paying. The bottom one is how much we're taking in on taxes. And you see this gap continues to increase. There are projections out there that the savings account goes to zero anywhere from 5 to 13 years, depending on how much expenditures go up and how much taxes go up. And by taxes, unless we increase the tax rate, we're going to have to, expand the tax base. But right now with the economy, it's not like we're collecting more tax revenue.
Yeah. And Jason, you kind of highlighted there's really only two options here. Social Security will run out of money. Either you cut the benefits of those people in about 10 years, or you raise taxes significantly on everybody else that's paying into the system right now. There's no good way out of this. And this is a problem that has been talked about for years. We are running out of time very fast about how to deal with it, but there's only two ways out.
Well, yeah, and that's when we talk about the political energy around this. All Americans should be able to look at these numbers and go, holy cow. And hopefully, if you're that guy that tweeted at Nikki Haley, or you feel that way, or you thought that way, you're like, wait a second, I'm looking at the number on the socialsecurity.gov website, and it shows me that the money I've put in I'm almost 50. I've put money into there for 30 years. My money's been spent already. There is none of my money left other than the money I put in the last year or two, but that money will quickly be exhausted.
Absolutely. And just to talk about the graphic here, one of the things that really jumps out, you talk about how on the right side here, we're looking at, $2.5 trillion. That number stays relatively similar going back to 2010 in our graphic here up to the present time here. This is what's in the so-called trust fund. We'll get into that in a second here. But if you look at what is getting paid out, that number has doubled in the last 10 years. And you can see really fast how this escalates, where we are doubling. We're going to continue to grow in what is going out, but we're not getting the same amount in. And again, that's going to get down to zero really soon.
Right. And when you look at too, and we'll do some historical context, and we'll kind of go back to the beginning probably next year and kind of explain kind of how we got here. But our politicians are making these decisions to give Social Security money out at a rate which we can't afford. It's no different. I got a checkbook. Todd's got a checkbook. All the people watching have a checkbook, which, by the way, thanks so much for tuning in. If you find this interesting, like, comment, and share. Especially make sure to share with friends on the right or the left. If you got a few Democrat friends, I've got them. Everybody needs to understand how critical this is and how we need to address this as a country, and not let our politicians inflame with all this language about, oh, you're trying to cut the old people. Oh, you're trying to do this. We just need to all unite as citizens and realize our political class is trying to do things that are just bad for the American people. And they've lied to us. So
absolutely, Jason. And we hammer this point home every time, and we'll continue to say it. This show is about information for everyone across the political spectrum. It's about reuniting folks with common interests. We talk about focusing on family, community, religion. This is an us versus them problem. Don't let them turn it into a Republican versus Democrat, a left versus right. Those issues certainly exist out there. But when it comes to Social Security and government entitlement programs and the welfare state and just the bureaucracy in DC, this affects all of us, and it affects people across the political spectrums that have really the same goals and values in life here. Jason, I think it's time for us to get our first video here. This is going to be a quick overview of what that scam is that we're talking about. I think this is a worthwhile minute to watch, and then we can debrief it.
This intergenerational Ponzi scheme, that's really what Social Security is. I mean, it wasn't created that way in the 1930s when Roosevelt first concocted this Social Security, and it was totally unconstitutional and unfortunate that we have it. But the idea was that it was like insurance. The government was going to take the money and invest it, and then when everybody was older, you would get paid your benefits, and they even called the taxes premiums. But the whole thing was a con because it never was insurance, because the government never invested the money. They spent the money. And now they gave themselves an IOU. They created these things called trust funds. And so what would happen is the government would collect the money from Social Security. Then they would take the Social Security money and spend it on whatever, military or whatever they were doing. But then they would put an IOU in the government trust fund in the form of a bond. And then they would say, oh, we have an asset in this trust fund. We have a bond. That's not an asset. It's your own debt. It's like if I write myself a check for $1 million, I can't take that uncashed check and claim I've got $1 million asset. No.
Remarkable. Now, it's interesting. I am going to fact check him a little bit with the origins of Social Security. So understand, in the 1930s and earlier, if you were an American citizen, you were responsible for your life. You were responsible to pay your bills, to contribute to society, to do things. Retirement was one of those things you were responsible for. It was on you. You needed to figure out how you were going to save, what you were going to build, all those sorts of things. After the financial crashes in the 20s, government said, okay, everybody lost a bunch of money, and it was going to be challenging for older folks for how are they going to retire. So if you look back in the mid 30s and starting in 1937, that was when they decided, hey, we're going to launch this Social Security program. The original program was basically you paid in, and then if you paid in, you got out. Not everybody paid in. There were some categories of people that didn't pay in, but those people also weren't entitled to a payout. But it was going to start building that nest egg as kind of a forced retirement. And this is an important point too. Americans aren't given the choice to opt into this 401k or this retirement plan. Right now, if you look, 6.2% of your income goes into this account that is paying right now for people that are retired or wherever they're giving the money to, people on disability or all those other sources. But they reported as 6.2. The reality is your employer pays 6.2% too. So it's a total of 12.4%. And you might say, well, that's the employer. They should pay taxes. We've all heard big government doesn't pay taxes. Well, for every dollar that, if I'm an employer and I hire Todd, I've got to give the government 6.2% of his income in Social Security tax. If you're self-employed, you're expected to pay the 12.4%. So think of that. Let's say you are fortunate enough to make $100,000 a year. You're self-employed. You will write a check for $12,400 to go to this black hole of Social Security. You weren't given the choice. You couldn't opt in or opt out. You were just opt in. So, Todd, anything to add to the origins of Social Security?
Yeah, let's go back in time a little bit. But to your point about opting in, again, this is not a retirement program. This is a welfare program. This is about redistributing your money to somebody else that didn't necessarily earn it. Now, there might be some people that say, okay, the wealthy do have an obligation in a rich society to support the poor. Open to that debate. But what's happening here is that we have been lied to for decades about what Social Security is. And that's the point of the show right now, is that what you think Social Security is you getting your money back, is not the case at all. It is a welfare entitlement program from the government that is bloated, and that's running into a lot of problems because, as that video showed as well, the money you pay into Social Security, that can go to anything. And then what the government does is does all these accounting tricks on the books there that says this money is going to be taken out, get spent on the military industrial complex, what have you, and then we'll just put that IOU back in the account, and then we'll start working our magic that way on the books. So remember, this is not your money that you're getting paid. This is someone else's money. Jason, you and I may live long enough to see it. We may not, but it won't be our money we're getting back. This is going to be that next generation of our kids working who are then subsidizing us.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an older person and you're on Social Security and you walk into Starbucks and see the blue-haired liberal, like, that's the one paying your Social Security. So I guess maybe thank them for that.
Yeah, but also a great point on the self-employment. You and I, Jason, we're self-employed right now. And again, we're writing that check to the government to hand out goodies to a potential voter. If they talk about raising it, they're trying to buy votes with your money. You and I pay a lot right now to Uncle Sam over there to redistribute that money that we're earning.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, too, as an aside, if we ever wanted to fix the tax problem in America, you would eliminate automatic withholding. Because if you're self-employed, and like, let's say you make $100,000 a year, just to talk a round number. State of Minnesota, I'm going to write you a check for $10,000, about 9% of my income. I'm going to write a $12,000 check to Social Security, $12,400. So now my $100,000 I made, I paid $80,000 just to the state of Minnesota and Social Security. And then you get into your federal income tax. Federal income tax, somewhere around 20 something percent. So let's just say 20 grand. So I'm a self-employed dude. I make $100,000. I've got like $40,000 right off the top that I'm writing to the federal government. And like I say, if people don't see that, because you get a job, you get a check, oh, I got a refund. They don't realize a refund just means you paid too much already. But if you ever had to write that check, and let's say the average person here is making 60 grand, like you're paying 10, 12 grand to the federal government. If you had to get to the end of the year and write a $12,000 check and drop it in the mail to the US government, you'd be like, shit would change. People would be like, whoa, let's quit giving people stuff. So Todd, take us through the timeline.
Absolutely. So the lesson here is that once you give government an inch, they're going to run for miles on end. They're going to go around the world multiple times here. So again, as Jason kind of prefaced at the beginning of the show, Social Security was started shortly after and during the Great Depression. Up to 50% of retirees at that time had no savings. So the government looks at this, steps in and says, we're going to do something to support people right now in this time. Starts off with a very limited small group of people who had access to the Social Security funds, and they even gave themselves a 5-year buffer. So Roosevelt signed legislation in 1935. They didn't start paying out really until a couple years later, so they could build up some bank there. But then shortly thereafter that, if you're watching live here, you can scroll down the graphic that we have up right now. And so by 1939, this is before the system even kicks off, they decided they're going to add 2 new categories of beneficiaries, spouse and minor children of a retired worker. By 1950, they're already doing huge cost of living increase adjustments. In the 50s, you look at disability getting added to the Social Security payments. Interestingly, we're going to go on this a little bit later in its own aside here, but Fleming versus Nestor in the 1960s said that you have no right to the benefits of Social Security. So here you are again. You don't opt in. You get this money taken away right off the top. You never have, goodbye. You never see it. It's never in your checking account. And then the Supreme Court says, well, even though you might be of retirement age, eligibility, you actually don't have a right to that. Congress at any time can say, sorry, Jason, we're yanking the plug. We're going to up the age now to 70. We're going to decrease what the monthly payments are. In this ruling specifically, Fleming versus Nestor is an interesting case. It actually said that in this case, an immigrant who had been here for 19 years, paid into the system, left the country, but was entitled to collect payments, or so he thought. Congress shut him down and said, nope, you actually don't get to do that. So again, it's not your money that you get on the other side of that, but interesting that you can be taxed on that under the promise of receiving something later on, and still nothing comes of that. 1961, they already lower the age from 65 to 62. You add in 1965, here's another 2.9% that you're paying every paycheck. Medicare health benefits added to Social Security. And then again, by 1966, Medicare tax of 0.7 added to pay for the increased Medicare costs. Who would have thought that all these entitlement programs needed more money? And so here they are. They keep adding the juice onto this.
Yeah, and that's an important thing for people to understand. So we generally are conservative guys, and I think we're probably more libertarian. We just don't want a big federal government. The federal government's terrible. They don't help benefit the American people. But back in the 30s, there was, let's give them credit and say there was good intentioned politicians. They saw all these folks lost all their life savings in the Depression, and they wanted to say, or the stock market crash, all those sorts of things. And they said, how do we want to protect these folks so that they don't lose all their money and they're living on the streets? So my opinion, businesses, charities, churches, your communities should rally together and help those. Your kids, frankly, they look at the parents and go, hey, mom and dad, let's help take care of you. That used to be the norm in America. But instead, we outsourced all that power and all that responsibility to the federal government. And we went from this simple, okay, we're trying to do a good thing, to, let me repeat that number, folks. We spent over $1 trillion last year on this entitlement plan. That's trillion with a T. I mean, trillion is, that's like a made up number. I mean, next we're going to have a gajillion. Like, we're going to just keep making up numbers as they go along. And the video did talk about, and Todd mentioned it too, understand where that money's going. They take that Social Security money, they buy a federal government bond, which means that money moves into the general accounting and gives the federal government money to spend in Ukraine or on whatever other stupid programs they want to do. Now, as long as that bond holds value, like, it's not the end of the world. But we're running up where those bonds are underwater, and we're looking at de-dollarization with BRICS, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, like you said, maybe best of intentions started off as an insurance program. What you pay in is what you're going to get out. And in a couple of years, that plan was already out the window. And you see the machine starting to, rub their hands together and say, we got all of this money coming in now. What can we do with it?
Right. And it's interesting too. And hey, folks, thanks a lot for the comments here. We'll go through some here in a minute, but it's interesting when you look at back in time how they continue to increase who they're giving money to, and it was largely done just for political expedience. And if you ever wonder if this was a scam from the start, I'll just like to share a story, and this is from the Social Security history of the program. The first monthly payment was issued on January 31st, 1940, to Ida Mae Fuller of Ludlow, Vermont. In 1937, 38, 39, she paid a total of $24.75 into the Social Security system. Her first check was $22.54. So in 3 years, she paid in $25. She got $23 out her first check. After her second check, she received more than she contributed in the 3-year period. Now, maybe you can say, well, hopefully the interest paid for that. Ultimately, when she reached her 100th birthday, dying in 1975, she collected a total of $22,882.92. So not a bad investment for $25. And like I say, we're not holding this against her or say it was wrong or that sort of thing. Like, the program was kind of set up as a Ponzi scheme to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know I'm shaking my head here. Again, nothing against her. Again, I don't think Social Security plans on. They certainly don't. They have their actuarial tables. They're not expecting someone to live to 100. But again, that as life expectancy increases and there are more retirees, you can see how this problem gets out of hand super fast. I wanted to go back to the history one more time too, Jason, as we talk about the hungry beast in DC. And so again, as I'm reading off here, this is from Newsweek. We can drop this article in the comments here. This is a lot of good juicy information here, but original Social Security contribution was of 1% of pay. Again, this wasn't to everybody. And you can really quickly see how that tax rate grew to 1.5% by 1950, 5% by 1978, and then that 6.2% that Jason mentioned earlier has been in effect since 1990. And they also apply that up to now $147,000 in earnings. And as we said before, if I had to bet on it, I would guess that rate has to go up in order to keep this program solvent. I don't see politicians who rely on your vote to go back to the swamp. They're not going to cut your benefits because then they're not going to vote for you. And so it seems likely that 6.2% that we can already complain about can only go higher as they try to figure this mess out.
Well, and just 2 points there too, Todd. We say 6.2%. It's 12.4. Because if your employer is stuck paying 6%, if I hire Todd and say, hey, I'm going to pay you however much a year, and I know I have to pay 6%, like, that's a cost for me. That's income that could be going to Todd instead of to Social Security. The second thing is, if you look at that, the whole kind of principle of where this started was we want to have the more fortunate help the less fortunate. Well, I'm going to say if you make $147,000 a year, like, you're doing pretty good for yourself, right? But you're not rich. You're not Bill Gates. You're not these oligarchs. You're not even Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, or any of these multi-million-dollar politicians. You 147,000 and below is like, it's not that much money really in the grand scheme of things compared
and
to
especially after all the taxes that you have to take out from that.
Yeah, it's interesting if you think about that. If you're self-employed, make $147,000, 12% goes to the federal government. So you write a $20,000 check for Social Security. And then in Minnesota, you write a 10% to your state, and then you write a 20-some% to the federal government. So your $147,000 sounds like a ton of money. All of a sudden you're sitting at like $80,000. And it's funny. I had one of my buddies that we had an investment property that we sold, and it was like we bought this house, we rehabbed it, we rented it out, we did all this work ourselves. Then at the end, it's like, okay, let me write a $70,000 check to the federal government, literally like U.S. Treasury, $70,000, and it's like, you did nothing to earn that, Federal Reserve. Why am I sending you money?
Absolutely. And Jason, I think it's time to get into what are the narratives coming out of politicians' mouths right now. We have a couple of Joe Biden clips. Before we do that, just want to welcome every new viewer that's come in. We see the view count continue to go up, and I think this is the takeaway from today here. This is the message that we need to get across as well. So I'm going to put up this old tweet that we talked about earlier here. This is the mentality of maybe most folks out there. They think that what they pay into Social Security is the money that they get out. And we need to impress upon you that that is simply not the case. Jason and I, when we pay our taxes every month, that money goes right to someone collecting Social Security. It is in and it is out. They are not getting their money. They're getting our money. And the same will be true of us if we happen to have Social Security by our retirement age here. But let's get into some Joe Biden clips. I think it wouldn't be a Friday without listening to Joe and getting a little riled up here. But this is how, again, as we've kind of talked about what Social Security is, this is how Democrats are politicizing the issue right now.
Here tonight, to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion.
It would not be a Friday, like Todd said, without Joe Biden reflecting back on just how he can't complete a sentence and how he belongs in memory care. But this is exactly how politicians are destroying America. That was the most irresponsible, false representation of the facts I've ever seen a politician do. People on the right do it too. But the fact of the matter is, folks, we have a spending problem. We don't have enough money coming in. We have too much money going out. The program's going to go bankrupt. And it's across our entire federal government. $37.5 trillion in debt right now. That means every American citizen, your share as an American citizen is $95,000 in government debt. If you're a taxpayer, which most people watching the show probably are, your share is $250,000. So did you realize you woke up today and you're $250,000 in debt for the federal government? It's beyond ridiculous. And Social Security isn't even reported in those budget numbers. It's treated as a separate bucket.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop this graphic up too. So again, Joe Biden saying this is a promise we made. You work hard and contribute. And when the time has come for you to retire, we'll be there to help you out. So let big government take care of you. You don't need your family anymore. You don't need your church. You don't need your neighborhood or community. Let Big Brother take care of you.
Right. And it's just so infuriating how many people look to the federal government to solve our problems. Our country was founded on we want to solve our own problems. We don't need Big Brother to step in. We don't need anybody to, don't tell us what to do. Give us some guardrails. Let us go live our lives. Let us be responsible for ourselves. Yeah. And all this narrative is just pure politics trying to win elections. And as you look back at those timelines, and we could do a 3-hour podcast where we dug into each one. I mean, in the 70s, they had expanded a bunch of people that got Social Security and disability benefits, and they increased how much they paid with no fixing on the back end. The program almost went bankrupt. Republicans stepped in, and there was bipartisanship where they recovered it. But we find ourselves in that point again, where in the next, by 2030, like that program's really in trouble. And a lot of Americans that are counting on that money are really in trouble. And we need to tell them the truth. And we need to find a bipartisan solution. But do you see Joe Biden with that narrative sitting down with Kevin McCarthy or anybody and saying, let's figure out a solution where this doesn't go bankrupt?
Yeah, remember, just a couple months later, Joe Biden would be calling out all ultra MAGA Republicans as a threat to democracy. So he has no interest in actually solving the problem, but he'll talk a big game. The quote here in the meme also says that you earned it. You earned every single penny and you paid into every paycheck. Again, promoting that narrative that somehow you're getting your money back, which continues to promote this myth that you're getting your money. Again, we can't emphasize this enough. You are not getting your money back. Jason,
It's
I have
funny
a clip.
too. One
Go
aside
ahead.
there. What I love too is how they send you your Social Security statement, like your 401k statement. And I don't know if you're old enough to start receiving that yet, Todd, but as you get older, so I get my 401k statement. Here's how much is in there. Here's kind of how much you can distribute. And that money's really there. Like I gave it, it's sitting there. It's for me and my wife and whatnot. But they send you a Social Security thing, which is here's your estimate of benefits, like your money's there, like your 401k. And it's not. It's gone, folks.
Yeah.
Back to you, Todd.
Yeah, let's pull up Biden number 2 here in case you weren't riled up enough already.
That they have to sign an agreement that they will not take a similar job in anywhere in the area. Look, one of my objectives is to restore the dignity of work, to restore it. You know, we've made a lot of progress over the past 2 years. Many of you have seen we've had a spirited debate last night with my Republican friend. My Republican friends.
Debate.
They seem shocked when I raised the plans of some of their members and their caucus to cut Social Security. And Marjorie Taylor Greene and others stood up and said, liar, liar. Reminds me of liar, liar, house on fire, yeah. Well, guess what? You know, I remind you that Rick Scott from Florida, the guy who ran the U.S. Senate campaign, has a plan. I got his brochure right here. Has a plan.
So here's the thing Joe Biden's not telling you too. He names Rick Scott there. So this was the day after the State of the Union when he made that first remark that we showed. And he said that Republicans want to sunset everything. In reality, Rick Scott is the only Republican that had any program in place or any legislation or bill in mind to actually go through with that. So to say that it was a Republican plan was completely disingenuous. It was one person's plan who happened to be a Republican.
Well, and another point on that, because the Rick Scott thing, like I've read and I've talked about, and we need more politicians courageous like Rick Scott to bring up things and say, this is really bad. We've got to figure out how to undo it. How do we protect the American people? Like that's exactly the conversation that we need to have. If Joe Biden were being honest, he'd say, folks, we got a problem. 5 to 13 years, if we don't make dramatic changes, this program's bankrupt. And a lot of you are counting on it. So instead of throwing names and calling people different things and trying to leverage it for political advantage, we need to actually sit down as Americans and say, let's solve this problem. And oh, by the way, we need, as much as you want the government to be good-hearted and you want the government to share different programs or let's pay for another this or another immigrant or another war somewhere, that sort of thing. Folks, we don't have the money. We just, it's ridiculous. We don't have the money.
And again, this isn't Jason and Todd making this up. This is the Congressional Budget Office. They're in charge of looking at the finance situation. This is not a secret. Joe Biden will go up there and bloviate about whatever else, but he's simply lying. You can see here on this other graphic that we have, it talks about 2020 or 2033, 2034 is when they expect not just Social Security to go out, the old age and survivor insurance, but we're talking about disability insurance trust fund as well. And again, when they call it the trust fund, as we talked about earlier, what they're saying is those are the IOUs. So again, you pay in your Social Security, your 12.4%, that goes and gets spent however Washington sees fit. And then eventually they recycle some of this debt and put it back out there. But 2033 is the date that if nothing changes, it's all gone.
Right. Hey, and just to kind of highlight a few comments, DC Bindwell, I want the government to be minimal and out of my business. 1,000%.
Amen, brother.
We couldn't agree more. Michelle, yeah, we see where that money's going. And that's an important point because Republicans are signing off on that money just as bad. Guess what? What the hell? China and Putin got plans too. We'll probably talk about it on a future episode. If you're not paying attention to BRICS, there is a financial, or BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China. They're starting their own currency. Right now, that financial agreement holds 40% of the world's GDP, and it's soon to be expanding. So there's huge things. I will give a shout out to DC Bidwell. Biden is a fraud. He's not even the real one. If you ever want to go deep dive conspiracy theory, pay attention to his ears, folks. They change all the time.
Look at his eyes too. There's some good memes out there of maybe 9 different Biden pics, and the eyes never line up. Nose, ears. Yeah, don't get us started, DC. I don't know if we can say that on Facebook.
Yeah, we'll be shut down.
So, Jason, I got one more clip here. I think this is going to be old school for us. This is Milton Friedman, and I don't know who better to say, where things are at, what happened here. Milton Friedman, one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, brilliant man, ahead of his time. And you listen to someone like him speak, or a Thomas Sowell back in the 70s when he started showing up on, again, my favorite C-SPAN. Ron Paul comes to mind too. These are individuals that have been saying this for decades, and nobody would really listen because we got stuck in that mainstream media cycle. And again, like you and I are trying to do here, we're freedom from the press. We're trying to break out of that mold, share some real information, and have honest conversations that you're not going to get anywhere else here. So we have Milton Friedman talking about a description of Social Security. And sorry, this is a live show, so I'm just looking for the clip as I'm talking here.
People who have been receiving payments have received much more than the actuarial value of what they paid. That's because you've had a growing working force, you've had higher wages being paid, wage rates have gone up the wage tax has gone up very sharply. But the number of recipients is growing relative to the number of people paying. And that's why Social Security is currently in so much financial trouble. That's why the so-called reserve, which is not a reserve at all, the so-called reserve has been getting smaller and smaller.
So there it is. This was, I think, circa 1980. So 40 years ago, here he is. He's saying the same thing that we are today. This problem is not new. It has been known about forever. It just simply hasn't been reported. And people, they got their monthly checks. What do they care?
Yeah, and it's interesting too. And we can share the chart that links that we've been kind of referring to here. Let me just drop it in the chat. So this is the actual chart that breaks down kind of who, what, where, when, why. But if you look at when was the last time we actually brought more in than we paid out in Social Security. So it's been, or if we brought in like enough to actually build a bank, it's been decades since we've done that. And like we've added a little to the savings, but not nearly enough. If you and I ran our finances like that, Todd, what would happen to us?
Prison comes to mind, right?
Right.
Financial fraud to some extent. We'd certainly be broke. My mortgage wouldn't get paid anymore. I don't think I'd have a car. I wouldn't be able to put gas in it. At the best case scenario, I'm on the street. Worst case scenario, depending on how I cook the books, writing those fancy IOUs to myself and trying to cash the checks, it gets a lot worse really fast.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember back when I was in the corporate world and I had a good job and I made a pretty good living. And I remember you work with other people and, when you're in a pay grade, like everybody's got this, everybody makes kind of about the same depending on bonuses. And I remember like pulling up to meetings and I've got my nice, I got an Altima and some guy's got a pimped out Range Rover and, a $500 watch. And I'm like, I know kind of how much you make because you don't make that much different than me. And there ain't no way you can afford that. And then sure enough, 5 years from now, like the dude's bankrupt and he sold all his stuff. That's where our country is headed, which is sad. And we'd like to avoid that.
Absolutely. Jason, we have 2 more clips here. We haven't talked much about a Ponzi scheme yet. Before we do that, though, here's the Republican side talking about some of these entitlement programs, a couple different presidential candidates, popular GOP politicians, let's say. The video is framed as a gotcha. It comes from a leftist Twitter account. So he's trying to say, look at these evil Republicans trying to take away your hard-earned dollar here. But the conversation is getting had out there. It's just a matter of, are we willing to listen and take some appropriate measures to solve this problem?
It will be my objective to phase out Social Security, to pull it up by the roots and get rid of it.
Entitlements ever be on your plate?
At some point they will be. You know, that's actually the easiest of all things if you look.
But I think we should try to look at entitlements, look at restructuring Medicare.
We all know where the real issue is in terms of long-term debt for the United States. We've got to put them on the table in the long term.
I think I have to be excited about their response to the long-term challenges that we have in our entitlement programs. There's no doubt that we have to wrestle this beast to the ground.
We need to acknowledge all of the entitlements that we have. It's an issue. So the first thing you do is you change the retirement age.
Okay, so they're starting to talk about it. I mean, it could be a lot of Kevin McCarthy talk where you become Speaker of the House and nothing changes in 9 months. We still have Mayorkas, we still have Biden. We're probably going to get the debt ceiling deal done in September here. So again, it could be empty talk, but it is getting discussed.
And here's what's important to understand, and we keep referring back to it. The name of the show is Freedom from the Press. And if you look, all these Republicans, and we're not super fans of rhinos. We hate rhinos just as much as we hate Democrats, to be honest. So Mitch McConnell, no. President Trump, I'm a huge Trump fan. Maybe some of you are, maybe some of you aren't. I don't like neocons. I don't like warmongers. I don't like any of that. But these folks are actually trying to bring up a sober conversation that Americans need to have. The fact is, you can like it, you can hate it, you can feel however you want about it. We either need to take in way more money or pay out way less money. That's it. That's the choice. And if Democrats want to live in a fantasy world to gain political votes from all these people that are on these entitlement programs, and not just Social Security, because we've explained how that money gets filtered through bonds to other programs, but all these folks, they just keep giving them money and say, vote for us. If you don't vote for us, they shut off the money. And, give credit to these Republicans because they call Social Security the third rail in politics. And if you know the third rail in the subway system, the third rail is the electrified one. So if you step on that, you get blown up. So, but thank God they're starting to have that conversation. But it is a damn shame what our media and Democrats are doing in this case, where we should be having a sober conversation, and instead they're just fanning the flames.
Yeah, and we're going to wrap up today's show with some solutions that I'm open to. I think this is going to be certainly my personal opinion, so I'm glad that they're having that conversation. Again, as we call out politicians on all sides, though, yes, they're identifying it's a problem. Anyone can go pull up the CBO report. So this is not breaking news. It's nice that they're actually saying it, though, instead of Joe Biden just maligning MAGA Republicans and they're trying to take away all your money. That no, you did not pay in because you're getting someone else's money at this point. Before we get into that, though, you and I have danced around the issue of a Ponzi scheme, Jason, and I think it's just important to lay it out right now. Social Security, as Milton Friedman said separately, is the greatest Ponzi scheme on earth. As you talk about how it works, and we'll show a little clip here. I think it does a good job illustrating the issue, but if you are getting money from somebody else and they're getting money from somebody else and they're getting money from someone else, generationally, this is how Social Security works. I don't know any other way to describe it other than a Ponzi scheme. But let's take a look at how this works. We can dive into that a little bit more, then maybe we can offer some solutions here, Jason.
Go for it.
Name suggests a pyramid scheme is an investment scam which revolves around current investors receiving money by recruiting new members. The new members will receive money by recruiting other people, and so on. Let's assume Peter starts a pyramid scheme where the cost of being a member is $100 per month. He promises to pay people $90 monthly for each person they get to join and keeps $10. Paul and George pay Peter directly and join. Therefore, Peter now makes $200 per month. Paul then invites Rachel and Sarah, whereas George invites Bill and Jim. Peter now makes $240 per month, whereas Paul and George make $180 monthly, but are left with $80 after paying their $100 fee. The four newest members, however, aren't making any money and have to pay $100 monthly. If they don't manage to get new people to join, they'll quit. This means Paul and George won't make money anymore, so they'll quit too if they don't get new members, making the pyramid scheme collapse. A Ponzi scheme, on the other hand, also relies on new money coming in to pay existing investors, but with one exception. The investors don't know this. They're being lied to and think it's a legitimate investment. This is what Bernie Madoff got away with for decades. He convinced people he generated returns by trading, when in fact, he was simply using money from new members to pay existing ones. Some people think our entire financial system is a Ponzi scheme because it needs perpetual growth, but that is a topic for another video.
It's funny. I love the Bernie Madoff comparison because there's a ton of great shows and movies about what he did. And tell me if this sounds like Social Security. So you invest money with me. I then tell you I'm going to go buy these stocks. I'm going to create a financial document that I send to you that says, this is how much is in your account from the investments I made. And then you find somebody to give me more money. Meanwhile, that money there, I didn't really go buy those stocks. I went out and I bought a car. I paid some people. I took the money. And as long as you don't want your money back, or not enough of you want your money back, and people keep getting these paper reports that show how much they're getting, the scheme holds up. When does it break down? When enough people want their money back, and then there isn't any money to pay them. If you think of Social Security, almost exactly the same thing. I get this statement every month that says I'm going to get this amount when I retire, or every year, however often they send it. And that money's not there, folks. And so for that, the government to be sending that like it's a promise, and you treat it as, hey, this is the money I'm going to get back, like it's just unsustainable.
And Jason, what happened to Bernie Madoff?
He's in prison, as should many a politician be. And I got to tell you what, folks, President Trump, the charges are against him, just to dovetail into that, like we think they're crap. But if we're going to treat every politician to the same level of scrutiny that we're treating President Trump, Washington, D.C. would be vacant tomorrow. They'd all be arrested.
Lock them all up. Yeah, one more point on that video too, Jason, to go back to that. I love the line, and I think I saw you smile about the same time I did. They said the difference between a Ponzi scheme and a pyramid scheme is nobody knows what's happening. I mean, doesn't that sum up our conversation on Social Security right now? And again, not placing blame on anyone. Ignorance is not a pejorative in the sense it's that we've been told for our entire lives at this point what we think Social Security is, when that's simply not the case, as we've outlined today. We don't know what's happening, ergo Ponzi scheme. And like you said, we get these little notes and promises and records and documents, and they all say, here's your money coming to you in so many years, or this is what you've accumulated. I mean, that's simply not true. That money, it might as well say zero in there or $1 billion. It doesn't matter. The money's not there.
Right. And actually, you say it perfectly well, too. Like, they could tell me I'm getting $10,000, but I'm smart enough to look at the government's checkbook. Like, we shared the link to it. It's just a simple thing. And like, how can you promise me that? Like there's no way for you to do that. So, Todd, should we move into solutions?
Let's move into some solutions here. So I don't know if I'll take it away, Jason. Sure. So when we showed the Republican clips there, and they're all naming that it's a problem, we got to do something about Social Security. Joe Biden, in his follow-up to the State of the Union, even said, I'm naming you specifically, Rick Scott, all the other Republicans. Remember, they booed him in the State of the Union when he suggested they were going to try to sunset these programs. Jason, if I'm being honest, I'm disappointed in the Republicans at the State of the Union because I want this program to sunset. Like you and I outlined at the beginning, moving forward, if nothing changes, the only solutions are cutting benefits, which, okay, I'm fine with, or raising taxes. But the third option that we didn't discuss so far is just eliminating the entire program altogether. And if I were a brave politician, that's what I would run on. And I would make my case to the American people and saying, this is a giant fraud getting perpetrated on you. Your parents, your grandparents, they all bought into the same lie. But we just need to get rid of Social Security. The Bush administration had brought up privatizing Social Security. I don't want government doing anything with my money. How about I keep the 12.4%? I'll take the 6.2 back from my employer, put that right in my checkbook. I'll keep the 6.2 that I was going to spend, on your entitlement programs. Let me keep that too. And if there aren't any welfare programs to back me up, I will have to make sound financial decisions. And if I don't, that's on me and I live with the consequences. Or my family has to step in and support me and maybe coach me up and say, listen, Todd, you blew through your money. You were supposed to set aside so much. Now we're on the hook. We're disappointed. Here's how you can do better. But as long as you have government in the back pocket, always willing to pick you up when you fall down, you're going to make silly choices. So get rid of it. Give the money back to the people. It is their money. They use the word sunset. It's kind of nice. I would say gut it or kill it. Like let's not speak in euphemisms. Like Social Security just has to go.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. And I guess this is where Like some people, especially folks that are counting on Social Security because they haven't set money aside, or people that are receiving Social Security, like they're going to hear that and they're going to go, whoa, like I don't like that. And if you're a politician, you say that, it's going to be unpopular. The fact of the matter is, folks, is we have to decide as a nation, are we going to count on Big Brother to be there to take care of us? And do we really want to delegate that responsibility to the federal government? As I look at the federal government, and I remember when I was young and growing up, the last person I ever trusted with anything was the federal government. It is the most inefficient. If any business, if Amazon was run like the federal government, they would be bankrupt in a day. If any of these big companies that we have were run like the federal government, they'd be bankrupt immediately. And the country, if you went back to George Washington and said, hey, a couple hundred years after you found this nation and all the framers, the people in the Revolutionary War, do you know we're going to have the largest federal government in the history of mankind? It's going to be the biggest employer in the world. All those founding fathers would have said, do you guys not understand why we fought this war? Do you not understand why we overthrew the most powerful nation in the history of nations? Like, you're mental. It's insane. But that's a tough thing. And I'll be honest, a lot of people don't want to be responsible for themselves. And that's too bad.
People want to get taken care of, Jason. And just to expand on my point too, I'm not saying it ends tomorrow and payments stop. I think you can agree on a number. Maybe 50 is the cutoff. It'd be arbitrary, but you have to set aside something. Look, you're 50. You've been maybe saving up or planning for this in a certain way. If you're 50, you will be promised Social Security. If you're 49 and younger, don't plan on it being there. So I think that's the compromise. So when I say gut it and kill it, yep, do away with it. But there can be a transition period because we're not going to leave someone out to dry that is right there at collection age or so close to it and can't do anything about it. So that would be my one caveat to the previous rant that I went on.
And like I say, I think in some of those cases too, you know, we have to decide as a nation, how many folks do we want to pay for? I mean, right now, if you're an illegal alien and you show up into America, we give you a little care package. It's got a cell phone and all this stuff. And all of a sudden you start receiving benefits. Meanwhile, tax-paying Hawaiians in Maui who just lost all their whole life's work, their house, they might have lost loved ones, we give them a $700 check. And don't even get me started on Zelensky. He's over there glad handing going like, I don't know if you saw that this week, Todd, not to dovetail into that. He said, we'll only have an election if the U.S. pays for it.
Oh, yeah. Well, he canceled his election. Again, this is probably information we need to have. Here we are defending a democracy over in Eastern Europe, and that very democracy is no longer holding democratic elections. And I think it's until the war ends or something like that. So don't plan on it anytime soon, basically. But it's simply astounding.
Well, yeah. And if you look, it's funny because you talk about people, and I'll be honest, I might be wrong. I never thought we could reach $37.5 trillion in debt before the whole system collapsed. And, you know, I remember going back and all the deficit was a problem and it was this much or that much. And it was every politician that did it. So we're not just saying Democrats or Republicans, but I never thought it could reach 37.5 trillion. Like, Todd, how high do you think it can go before it just implodes?
I mean, it could go forever like this and I don't understand quantitative easing enough to really get into this, Jason, but it seems like it will collapse at some point because that is what every fiat currency does. Ever since we got off the gold standard in the 70s, we became fiat. It will collapse. But at $37 trillion, honestly, I don't know how that's any different than $50 or $100 trillion.
Right.
But you referenced early, Jason, and this is certainly not the topic that we talked about, but you talked about BRIC nations getting together and controlling 40% of the world's GDP. I think the power of the petrodollar collapsing is a big catalyst in watching this entire system fall apart, because once we lose reserve currency status in the world, and that could happen next year, that could happen in 20 years. Again, there's no good timelines on any of this stuff, but we rely heavily on the world transacting in US dollars right now. And that's really what's propping us up. So once that goes, and it seems like it could very well head in that direction with the power of Russia and China and India and these large countries getting together and doing business outside of the dollar, that's going to lead to it, I imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and we've on one of the other podcasts we do, we've dug a lot into BRICS and how it's evolving. They're looking at setting up their own gold standard based currency, and to kind of understand for people who aren't familiar with that, just at a high level, that means you have $1 in gold for every dollar bill you print. And that's if you don't have a dollar of gold, you can't print a dollar. So there's a limited number of dollars that are out in the system. Right now, with the quantitative easing Todd talked about, it means you can print as many dollars as you want. And if you think of it like baseball cards, if you've got a rare baseball card, it's worth a lot in the world. But if it's not very rare, it's worth nothing. And right now, the only thing that's holding that up is that everybody's forced to do international transactions for oil and gas in US dollars. But as soon as that isn't backing it up, all of a sudden that dollar becomes fake. If you think of it, if you go to a casino and you have to convert your money for chips to play blackjack, and then the casino gets a rake, that kind of thing. If you no longer need to convert it to casino chips, if you can just use the neighbor's casino chips instead, and they're having a better deal, like that's when things get difficult for America.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's I'm going to pop up a few more comments, Jason, here. Again, appreciate the following today. Appreciate your inputs here. I mean, this show is for people out there, and your input drives this show as well. Let us know what you want us to talk about in future episodes. DC is back for more. Thanks for your engagement today, DC. But our debt is due to the greedy politicians on both sides of the aisle. Nailed it. Yeah, like Jason and I said at the onset of the show here, this is not, we did show some Joe Biden clips. The Democrats are certainly going down a path right now with their narratives, but this is not a Democrat problem. Republicans and Democrats share equal blame in what is allowed to happen with Social Security. The narrative is one piece, but then again, that's talk. What they're both agreeing to in action is letting the system continue its theft of the American people.
Yeah, actually, comments were just on fire today. Rosita has been all over illegal immigrants is evil, harming the American people. God help us. Wasn't the topic of the show, but 100% right. I think the nation is better when you have legal immigrants that come into the country who want to accept our norms and values, and they want to work to make America a great place. But just showing up with your hand out, trying to enrich yourself, no, not the program. Oh,
yeah, and Michelle, I mean, here's a big one too. Jason, you and I talk about government kind of allows you to get away with things. You don't have to be responsible for yourself if there's the federal government there to pick you back up. So let's get people off disability that aren't disabled, such as drug addicts, so on, when they're not really disabled. Yeah, it's a pretty low bar to start collecting some of that government cheddar. That'd be a great place to start.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that you think about that. So let's say it's Todd, and let's see Todd's neighbor is not working and contributing. Now, maybe Todd's neighbor can contribute more or can't based on whatever he's got going on. But how willing is Todd going to be to give him money out of his own check when he sees he's not doing anything to help himself? But yet we're completely okay with the federal government doing that. You wouldn't do it if it's your money. This just in, folks, when the federal government does, it's your money too.
Yep. And we talked about this with the border. If you're going to vote for a party right now, and again, we try to stay apolitical in terms of like what parties we support, but right now it's very clear. One party definitely has more rhetoric about keeping the border open. If you vote for them, would you let someone live in your own house? Absolutely not. Same goes for voting for the Social Security, keeping that pipeline open. Would you hand money to your drug-addled neighbor next door? Probably not. So if these are the values you hold, why are you voting for a party right now that goes against everything you believe in and wouldn't do on your own if it was your own decision-making leading to some outcome?
Absolutely. Well, hey, we're getting up to an hour, so we'll probably close it out here and wrap it up. First, folks, thanks. Every week so we're just two dudes. We both quit our corporate jobs to do this stuff, to help share the truth, to talk about bringing America together. You can support the program in different ways. A lot of you are watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble. Subscribe to our channel, share the show. Hopefully share it with somebody that needs to hear it. Right now, I think a lot of our friends and family on the left probably need to hear it more than friends on the right, because the Democrats are just so deep in the narrative. So share with them and just say, hey, give these guys a shot. Second thing is we got a couple websites. We have theamericantribune.com. That's kind of our light, fluffy website where we do articles about culture, and we joke we'll put cat videos or talk about alligators or whatnot, because that gets censored from big tech. We also have the americantribune.news, which is our Substack. And that's where we reference some of the articles that we talk about. So that's really an important one for us because that is completely uncensored. We've wrote articles on there about Bill Barr's connections to Epstein. We wrote articles about Joe Biden. Did you know he owned an island next to Epstein's island? We talk about Mitch McConnell's corruption, different things there. But that's one we're really proud of. And Todd and Will do a lot of deep dives in the content they write there. And, consider going there, subscribe. There's a free subscription. And if you think what we do here is valuable, like subscribe to a paid subscription. It helps us pay our bills because Todd's got 2 young kids. I got a wife and 3 dogs, and we appreciate everybody's support. Todd,
and if you do give that donation, make sure you add an extra 12.4% so that Jason and I can write a check to the federal government too while you're at it.
Absolutely.
Now, thanks for following another Friday here. We will be back next Friday, same time, 11 a.m. Hope to see you there. Keep the comments coming. If there's a show you want us to explore, let us know in the comments. Again, appreciate you following along for this last hour. Hopefully you found some value in it, entertainment-wise, information-wise. But thanks for following along. Have a great weekend.